Hey y'all, Peter back again. I've got another question that I have heard crop up by people who have read the Bible, whether they be believers or unbelievers in the Bible and God, is this: why would a loving God flood the earth like he did back in the days of Noah? How God flooded the earth, completely destroyed everything on the earth except for 8 people and some animals and birds and stuff. It's a good question, and it requires you know, it requires a decent answer. And when I was a Christian in the beginning, I kind of had that in the back of my mind as well. I read the Old Testament and I thought, well, gee, God is about love. We're taught that God is a loving God, yet God got the Israelites to kill and murder all these other tribes that were in the land. Anyway, it was a question that was in the back of my mind. But going back to the previous question, and it actually ties into the question that I'm about to answer. Why did God send the flood? Now, he sent the flood, if you read the book of Genesis, he sent the flood because of the great amount of evil that was on the earth today. Now, there is also a lot of evil in the earth today, like in this day, and there's been a lot of evil in the earth in past days. But there was something different about the evil in the days of Noah to the evil that's in the earth today. There must have been something different between those two because, look, God did make a promise that he would never flood the earth again. But God is an extremely merciful God, right? No matter how bad we are, no matter how much we've screwed up in life, there are people in heaven who have been murderers, who have done terrible things in the earth, but they're in heaven. Why? Because they turn to God. So God is so merciful. Now you may not like it. Some of you may not like that. Some of like people who rely upon their own good works and self-righteousness, that may not sit well with you. I know that. I can understand that. But it just goes to show how merciful God is. How merciful. But so why would this merciful, loving God just destroy the earth like he did with the flood? Because in today's day, God would still not do things like he would not send a flood today, and in fact he promised that he would never do that again. But I always wondered about this until I read uh, Genesis. I started to do a bit of a study on these Nephilim, the giants that apparently were walking the earth in those days. Now that's another whole subject, the subject of giants and the Nephilim, and it seems like it's so separated from us. It's like a side issue because we don't see people walking around today. But you really need to know a little bit about these giants, these Nephilim, so that you can understand the context of what happened back in Genesis 6 and why God actually sent the flood. So what actually happened, guys, was you'll see in Genesis 6 that the Bible talks about the sons of God, how they saw the daughters of men, women, and they basically had sex with them and they had children. Now these sons of God, the only other place where that term sons of God is mentioned is in the book of Job, when that term is mentioned, and it was directly referencing angels in heaven. So if we use the Bible to interpret the Bible, we can assume now that the term sons of God is referencing, back then, is referencing angelic beings, not humans, not human beings. These angelic beings were not demons at the time. They were angels. But they saw how pretty human women were. And they decided, a group of them decided, to basically forget what they were doing for God, stop doing whatever jobs God had for them. They went down to earth, and they became like they translated themselves into a human form, so they could be identified as humans rather than angels, which they are in fact capable of doing. And they had relationships with women, and to cut a long story short, the offspring was these hybrid beings called Nephilim, which in fact grew up to be massive, tall, gigantic beings, giants. Now, the Smithsonian Institute won't tell you this, but if you go back and do your research, you'll find that especially in the United States and other parts of the world, there is many newspaper articles archived about the discovery of massive human-like bones and skulls that are like 4 times the size of a human skull that have been found in various locations. But I don't want to go into detail about that, which just tells us that giants existed. They were not apes, they were just human-like figures with same proportions, not a same proportions, but with some slightly crazy variations, like 6 fingers instead of 5 fingers, and 2 rows of teeth instead of 1 row of teeth. So 1 and then 2 behind it, and then the same on the bottom. Some just funny things. So, but also massively tall. Now, the book of Genesis doesn't go into this quite so much, but these beings were flippin' evil, and they hated everything God, everything good, and everything God. Now, we do have another book which is not in the Bible, but it is an ancient historical book called the Book of Enoch, which goes into far more detail about this. And there are other books which the Jewish rabbis read, which also go into detail about this. But the Book of Enoch is the main one, which talks about these angelic beings. And the Book of Enoch says there was about 200 of them. But anyway, that is what happened in the earth today. And there are some who believe also, looking at these other texts, not the Bible, but these other texts, who believe that this is where the dinosaurs literally came from as well. These massive beasts, dinosaurs, which weren't really created by God. They weren't created by God because they were just terrible beasts, just ripping the earth and each other and to shreds. But they were also hybrids. They were not God's creatures, which he created from the very beginning. God said when he created something, it was good. It was good. But these beasts and these human beings, or half human, half angel beings, giants, were roaming the earth. They were beginning to populate the earth more and more and more and more, until finally, in Genesis chapter 6, we see this interesting little statement where it says, and Noah was blameless in his generations, or Noah was perfect in his generations. In other words, people sometimes when they read that, they think that Noah was just a blameless man and his mum and his dad and his grandparents were all righteous dudes. But in actual fact, it's talking about genetics here, guys. Perfect in his generations. In other words, unspotted. In other words, hadn't been polluted by some giant Nephilim crossbreed, 6th or 7th generation crossbreed. You can just imagine, right? Because you would have had these giants who would have then, they themselves would have had sex with other normal women, and so you would have had someone who was like 7/8 human and 1/8 Nephilim, just a mess. But they were genetically flawed. They would be basically, the earth was populated by genetically flawed human beings, genetically demonic, like evil, like these angels, and they weren't even real humans. Okay, so when you look at it from this perspective, you look at the dinosaurs, you look at the human being, God brought the flood. There were only 8 souls left on the earth. 8. Noah, his wife, his kids, and their wives. 8 souls left, which hadn't had some sort of interaction, who were basically pure blood human beings. So that, honestly, to me, explains a lot why a loving God decides to wipe out the face of the earth, because it was just all evil, and there was no redemption for these creatures, because they were not even real. They were not man. Like, God loved and created man. God doesn't want crossbreeding to happen. That's not from God. So these half-breeds, these hybrids were walking the earth. God brought the flood. Of course, you know the story. God supernaturally caused the normal animals to enter onto the ark. So that just normal lions, cheetahs, birds, hyenas, dogs, cats, which themselves hadn't been crossbreeding, But then you had all these dinosaurs and that. So he didn't bring any dinosaurs on the boat. He brought all these normal animals onto the boat, shut them up, brought the flood, wiped out everything else that was left behind, because it wasn't even from God, and it wasn't real, and it wasn't good. It was just evil, and it was only ever going to be evil. Ever. There was no change, no hope for them, because they were incapable of doing good, these creatures, and also these so-called humanoid giants. So that explains that. He wiped it out, started from scratch again with Noah. Now, somehow the Nephilim made it back into society again. Now, that's another question. I do not know the answer to that, how they managed to do that. But that's another question. But that explains why God did that, okay? Why a loving God wiped out all that stuff. So the other, and the thing I said was somehow they actually came back again, these Nephilim. Certainly not with the same population numbers as they came back, but they came back again somehow. They managed to get back again. I don't know how, but that also explains one of the reasons why God got the Israelites. He took these Israelites, separated them, gave them all these rules and laws. Don't intermarry with these other people. Don't go marrying other tribes and other races. You will only marry in amongst yourself. We think God's just being almost like racist. Like, it's like him saying to us, you don't marry a black person or an Asian person. God's like being, just, discriminating and racist. No, you see, you have to dig into this. But there are reasons why God said that. He said, do not intermarry with them. Not because, but because these people groups, well, not all of them, but some of these people groups are polluted. So that explains why God actually got King David. Once he had King Saul, he asked King Saul to carry out certain orders with one particular tribe of people. He said, listen, God said to him, listen, I want you to wipe out every single human being, every single animal, everything there, burn it, get rid of everything. But Saul said, said to himself, it's a bit rough, I'll spare this, or maybe the animals, or keep the animals, And God said, no, you can no longer be king. You think you just know better than I do. And God wanted them to wipe them all out because they were flawed. Okay? Genetically flawed. Not because God just didn't like those people, because they were, there was a very good reason for it. That's why when God raised up David, and he said, listen, God said, I found a man after my own heart who will basically do what I ask him to do, what I command him to do. And so David took on, we all know, many of us know the story, he took on the giant Goliath. He smashed Goliath, took his head, and then he basically, cut a long story short, David has his own army. He trains his own men. I'm skipping a lot of other things in the story here with King David, God was processing him to become king as well, but that's another story. But God trained up his men to become giant killers, very good warriors, people who could take on giants, because David knew how to take on a giant. But these men killed and slaughtered giants, killed them. God wanted these giants wiped off the face of the earth, and any people group which had been genetically infiltrated by these beings, he wanted them off the face of the earth. That's why God can sometimes come across to the untrained eye or to the unknowing person, comes across a little bit harsh. When we first read the Old Testament, I think we would all have that opinion. But as time goes by, we seek to learn. We start to discover these things and the reasons behind them all. There's very good reasons for them. So, but even before King David, in the time of Moses, and the time of Joshua, they took on giants even then, Og or Magog or whatever, I think, and they took down those giants. So many of you know the story. So that explains one of the reasons why when we read the Old Testament, how God can come across so brutal, okay? Because he loves us as a human. He loves us individually and collectively as a human race. He's preserving us. He's preserving us, okay, from being infected by these horrible, this evil agenda which these demonic angels brought down to earth, okay? So there's a lot you can talk about this, and this moves on to other subjects, but I just wanted to, I guess, address this particular subject, answer that question, and hopefully that will answer that question for you clear enough. But even answering that question may even create again other questions for you. But one step at a time. All right, I hope this blesses you. God bless you guys. Bye.